Hello, Dog Nation. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Today is Tuesday. That is good news because it puts us one day closer to the start of the season on Saturday. A lot on Georgia-Arkansas. Continuing on today's program, pretty volatile comment from Georgia wide receiver Kearis Jackson yesterday. We'll cover that. I'll explain also in today's show why I made such a point not to, as I said, spike the football yesterday about football being back. I'll kind of get more into that today, at least to make sure we're covering all of our bases here. Good stuff on the quarterbacks off the top of the program, including a very classy comment from Arkansas coach Sam Pittman. You'd expect nothing less from him when it comes to the guy that I think is starting to be the presumed starter for Saturday, Georgia quarterback D'Wan Mathis. What do you say we do it all? We'll bring Connor Riley on the show, too. He's got some good stuff for you as well. Busy. Glad you're here. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So over the last few days on our program, there is something that we've watched unfold right before our eyes. I told you about it was almost exactly this time a week ago that I'm not quite so sure the national media has caught up to the D'Wan Mathis story. I'm not quite so sure people realize that A, maybe JT Daniels is just not quite healthy enough as of yet, or B, maybe D'Wan Mathis has been very quietly one of the stories of the Georgia preseason camp. But Mathis seemed destined to possibly be the starter at the beginning of the season against Arkansas, and outlets like the ESPN and for a while the SEC Network, they were just sort of slow in picking up on this. I think that's starting to change. I gave you some examples on Friday of the SEC Network starting to talk more about Mathis. ESPN and some of the blurbs that it's written as of late have mentioned Mathis as not just a possible starter, maybe even a likely starter, at least at the beginning of the season. People are starting to catch up. And what's going to be fun, I think, for Georgia fans, and ultimately, I say this all the time, but I'll repeat myself here just briefly because leaders are repeaters. Georgia fans just want a good quarterback, right? And they just want a quarterback that can execute the new Todd Monken offense, whether it be, D'Wan Mathis or JT Daniels or, a Carson Beck, a Stetson Bennett, whomever else. Ultimately, what Georgia fans want, they want the offense to work well with whichever quarterback is there. However, the other thing that you can't really deny is that there's an aspect of what Mathis brings to the table in terms of the feel-good story that it really is kind of amazing. And it's going to be fun for Georgia fans to watch, assuming that Mathis is the guy that goes the beginning of the game against Arkansas, and assuming that he gets a chance here at the beginning of this season. It's going to be fun to watch the media acquaint themselves with the D'Wan Mathis story. Now, it could be one of those things that, years from now, maybe we're sort of tired of hearing about it the same way that a lot of these stories get recycled by CBS and ESPN and things like that over the course of time. But for now, a lot of people will be learning this for the first time. There is a guy, however, though, that doesn't need any introduction to Mathis. He knows him very well, having been a member of the Georgia coaching staff a year ago. That is, of course, new Arkansas head coach Sam Pittman. Now, when Pittman met with reporters yesterday, he had some very complimentary things to say about Mathis as a player, if he is the starter, what he might bring to the table, called him blazing fast, said that his athleticism is off the charts, and obviously complimented some other aspects of his game too, while also saying some things about JT Daniels as well. But there was one thing in particular that Pittman mentioned about Mathis in terms of knowing his backstory, appreciating what it would mean to Mathis and Mathis's family, and just the SEC and college football in particular, a feel-good story like this, if he is playing on Saturday. So before we do anything else today on this show, can we pause for a moment and just kind of appreciate what Sam Pittman said about D'Wan Mathis yesterday? This is a very classy gesture on the part of the new Arkansas head coach.
To be honest with you, guys, I'm really excited. If he plays against us, I'm excited. I'm excited for him because he had surgery that might not allow him to play, and he's come a long way. And certainly we're not wanting to play against him because he's such a talented young man, but I'm certainly thrilled that he has been cleared and is ready to get his football career back on course. Wonderful kid.
Listen, I think that's a really cool thing for Pittman to say and do. I mean, he didn't have to go into that much detail, but he wanted to. He could have just sort of sidestep that and say, I want to focus on my own team. And if he had, no one could fault him for doing so. Pittman just, to me, seems like a good dude. And I felt that way when he was offensive line coach at Georgia. I feel that way now that he's head coach at Arkansas. Obviously, I'm rooting like crazy for Georgia to beat him up on Saturday. But beyond that, I'll probably be rooting for Sam Pittman at Arkansas a little bit just because I kind of like the character and demeanor that he brings to the sport, and taking a moment to acknowledge the situation there with D'Wan Mathis and what it might be, what it might mean for Mathis were he to get a chance to start on Saturday or even get a chance to play a lot in the game. That's just a pretty cool gesture from Sam Pittman, so it seems appropriate to begin the show by mentioning that. Now, let me deal with the Georgia quarterback situation, though, beyond just the feel-good story here for a moment. I think it's really interesting to acknowledge that right now, Georgia is going about its business at quarterback a lot different than a lot of the programs in the SEC might be doing. Let me give you a few examples of this. Yesterday, you had Alabama name Mac Jones as its starting quarterback. Maybe not a huge surprise given the fact that Jones finished the job in that role a year ago, but there had been a lot of talk about Bryce Young. I think eventually Bryce Young will be the quarterback at Alabama, so, maybe you could have held that competition over into the start of the season. But no, Alabama has officially named Young. I'm sorry, excuse me. They've officially named Mac Jones. Let me make sure I give accurate information here. The Tennessee quarterback situation, if you want to go back, almost a year ago, I think there were some people that might have assumed that Harrison Bailey, the incoming freshman, might win that job. During the season last year, I think Brian Maurer was more popular with some Vols fans than Jared Garantano was, but Tennessee's been pretty clear throughout the entirety of the offseason that Garantano is their quarterback. And as you head towards the start of the upcoming season, even more clear with some of the recent comments to the media, Garantano is the guy there at Tennessee. They've officially named him as starter. South Carolina officially named Colin Hill as starter over Ryan Helinski. An official sort of declaration, that's our starting quarterback. LSU just did this with Miles Brennan yesterday. No real surprise there. I don't believe Brennan was really pushed for the job at all, but he has been officially named as starter. I guess if you look around the SEC right now, the only unsettled quarterback situation is probably Georgia. I'd say Ole Miss is a little unsettled between John Rice Plumlee and Matt Corral. Of the ones we care about, it being, frankly, Vanderbilt, Missouri, things like that, I'm not really quite sure. But, for the most part, across the board in the SEC, you've got pretty settled quarterback situations. You probably won't eventually at Kentucky with Wilson and Gatewood eventually competing. That's not quite off the ground as of yet. For the most part, though, there are settled quarterback situations, and a lot of examples that I just gave you, there are some announced quarterback starters. Georgia going about its business a different way. Kirby Smart asked directly when he met with the reporters yesterday, hey, are you willing to tell us anything about your quarterbacks? And Kirby said yes, but what he gave, maybe not the most forthcoming, but the plan for Saturday. Here is Kirby Smart briefly on that subject.
Yeah, I'm excited about the guys that have competed. They've all done a good job. They've all taken reps. Stetson, Carson, JT, and D'Wan have all done a good job. And excited to see those guys go out and play.
So, do we read into this? And I feel like a jerk for even doing this. But Kirby says Stetson, Carson, JT, and D'Wan. We know, based on some reporting, and Kirby Smart even acknowledging, that Stetson Bennett was not working with ones and twos during practice. You almost assume from that he might be then the fourth quarterback in this race. Carson Beck had exclusively been working with the twos, going back to the scrimmage that some donors saw a couple of weeks ago. Does that mean that Kirby's going in ascending order here between Stetson, then Carson, then JT, then D'Wan Mathis? Is that a little bit of a tell on the part of Kirby Smart? Maybe it is, maybe not. Sam Pittman also in his press conference yesterday mentioned that he wasn't expecting Kirby Smart to name a starter, and that's certainly his prerogative to do so. There was, however, a little bit more forthcoming moment from Smart in the press conference yesterday, and maybe it explains why Kirby's being so coy right now. There is apparently still a lot unsettled about the health situation for JT Daniels. We'll talk more to Connor Riley about that in just a moment. But also, this is a program that dealt with a quarterback opt-out. The news cycle spins so fast, you can almost forget that. But Jamie Newman was once here. He was getting a lot of reps with the number one offense. People like me had assumed he was going to be the starter. I don't believe I was incorrect in that assumption, and now he's not here. And in terms of how it's impacted the quarterback race, Kirby Smart was actually pretty forthcoming about this. He doesn't want to name a starter for Saturday, but in terms of how all the quarterbacks have been impacted now that Newman is no longer here, on this, Kirby was a little more forthcoming. Here's the UGA coach again.
With the rotation we had going, it probably didn't impact us as much as it would have had he been there the entire time. We had mini camp days, I call them 1 through, I think, 10 or 1 through 11, that he wasn't able to go in throughout the first half of those. The later part is when he got there. So we were able to give those reps to other guys, and we're probably fortunate that it happened when it happened in terms of trying to get a guy ready, because if it had gone, up until this point or even later, I can't imagine where we would be. But those reps would have been doled out between the other guys, so they certainly would have got more. And it was a concern of ours when you start thinking about spring practice not being there and being able to get the reps. But we've got to go with what we got, and we're excited about what we've got, and we got to do a good job, because we know that whoever it is not going to be a guy that sat there and played in a lot of football games, especially at the SEC level, and we got to be able to manage that, and we got to play to our strengths. So that's what I'm excited to see. I'm excited to see a lot of these offensive players that got to play against Baylor go out and play with a new quarterback.
So I think it's really interesting what Smart says there, not so much for what he says, in some cases what he doesn't say. He doesn't totally disregard the Newman storyline as not a complicating factor in this quarterback competition. I would say that it probably is. The same thing as well for JT Daniels' health there also. Georgia has dealt with the cards, or has been sort of forced to play with the card that's been dealt at the quarterback situation right now. Injuries, opt-outs, everything else. I think it's important for, as excited as Georgia fans might be about the possibility of seeing Mathis on Saturday, and I'm right there with you, to temper those expectations. It certainly sounds like Georgia wants to lean on some of its other offensive weapons on Saturday when it can. We're going to hear from Kearis Jackson in a moment. Kearis is obviously over the moon about what he thinks Todd Monken's offense may be able to do, and I hope that he ends up being right about that. My guess is if we do see that, I think we see that more towards the middle to the late portion of the season than necessarily right at the beginning. I've been saying for a while, I expect Georgia to win on Saturday, but I'm not quite so sure it's a thing of beauty. I think this offense is still very much a work in progress. I think the quarterback situation may take a while to figure out, and how all the other offensive pieces around those guys can be most effectively utilized. That's probably going to take some figuring too. One way or another, I'm anxious to see what Georgia puts on the field this upcoming Saturday, both for what may be a finished product and what may be worked on, built upon during the season that is to come. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast, radio, and streaming video show for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Good to have all of you with us here today, and a huge thanks to our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia for making it all possible. ESOG, they're proud partners of UGA, makes them fun to do business with. They are also great friends of ours here at DawgNation Daily, and boy, it's always a fun thing for me to recommend them to you because, listen, I'm a homeowner. Many of you are as well. I think the one thing we understand is there are a couple of things that can give some homeowners a little bit of angst. It's the notion of waterproofing issues. You see water creeping into your basement or your crawl space. It's the notion of a foundation foundation issue. You see those cracks showing up. That can be the sign of a serious problem. And I think sometimes when you see something like that, your first instinct is to sort of say, oh, what do I do about this? And I would say the best thing you can do is put some experts to work for you. Engineered Solutions of Georgia has 2 full-time engineers on staff. That means they are very smart, dedicated experts to the subject of keeping water outside your house, keeping your foundation secure. That's just what Engineered Solutions of Georgia is known for. As I said before, they're proud partners of UGA, and they're easy to get in touch with. You can simply dial them up by calling 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now. That'll get you in touch with Engineered Solutions of Georgia. All right, it's good to have you here on DawgNation Daily today, presented by ESOG. We'll get Connor Riley here coming up in a moment. Before that, though, I want to touch on what I just mentioned as we go around the doghouse. Delivered today by Marco's Pizza. Yesterday, Kearis Jackson, the Georgia wide receiver, was meeting with the media, and as much as I just tempered expectations a moment ago for what the unsettled situation at quarterback might provide for the Georgia offense and just what this offense is capable of doing early in the season, some of the Georgia players, it's fair to say, are pretty excited about all of this, including Jackson, who was asked, hey, what do you expect from this new Todd Monken offense? And Jackson gave quite a volatile quote. This is what Kearis had to say.
As an offense, what do you want that identity to be? What will it look like?
A new Georgia team that nobody ever seen before, that nobody will ever even thought of, that they would be seeing this type of Georgia team. Just want to come out of being explosive and just putting points on the board every time we get being able to touch the ball.
So it may be like a million years since you've been to a movie theater, but if my Photoshop skills were a little better, this would be one of those days where I'd do a movie poster. Like the big quotes like, greatest movie of the year, explosive blockbuster. Like the quote that Kearis gives you there is clearly the kind of quote that would look good in big letters on a movie poster. A type of Georgia offense you've never seen before. That's certainly exciting to think about, and I hope that Kearis ends up being right about that. And I think the pieces are in place that something like that could happen possibly before the season is done. As I said before, I just think it's important, though, to keep expectations somewhat manageable near the beginning of the year so that UGA has the chance to exceed them. After all, there's a very good chance that Georgia plays a quarterback on Saturday that hasn't played much in his career, and there's still a very good chance that some of the pieces that are in an expanded role this year are still learning some of the facets of their new job, their more expanded, more important job they maybe had in previous seasons. So I love what Kearis says there. It gets me excited about the season to come. I guess it's just sort of important to sort of hold off on expecting too much too soon, but admittedly, like any other fan, I love what Kearis Jackson had to say yesterday. It's Around the Doghouse. It's delivered today by our friends at Marco's Pizza. You know, Marco's Pizza is America's most beloved pizza. It's real pizza made the Italian way, and it's made in a very careful way with you. 450-degree oven, touchless, delivery to you. They just take really good care of both keeping you healthy and safe, but also just delivering really good pizza there as well. They got a great deal, too. You're watching a lot of sports right now. The sports calendar very busy. A great way to accompany all of that. How about a large one-topping pizza, 10 chicken wings or dippers? It's just $17.99. This is truly a DawgNation game day favorite. Think about the game this weekend. A lot more home gating going on. Good way for you to do all of that. Go to the Marcos app or go to marcos.com, and you can get delivery and carry out. Marcos.com, the website to go to for a whole lot more on that. All right, it is great to have you here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia today. One of the things we'll do before we're done, a little bit of a serious look at just the COVID testing that Georgia's got to go through this week. I'm a little nervous about some of that kind of stuff just because it's still pretty new to me. Connor Riley's going to update us on that a little bit. I also want to talk to him more about the quarterback situation, the excitement that might be building around Todd Monken's offense. We'll do a lot of that with him. As I said before, it's great to have you with us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by ESOG.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We'll join Connor Riley here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And I made this reference before. Connor, you know what I'm talking about. You're a movie buff. You're like me. You've probably been 1,000 years since you've been to a movie theater. And but the big poster, it seems like Peter Travers from Rolling Stone is always the one that's giving the most explosive quotes of, I was on the edge of my seat, thrill ride. Kearis Jackson's line about the Georgia offense. This is an offense that you've never seen before. That looks great in big letters on a big summer blockbuster movie poster. I hope it's not too much of an oversell in the early portion of the season. I'm trying to temper my expectations a little bit, but honestly, to hear a guy like Kearis excited about what he's about to be a part of as a fan, that's probably more enjoyable than the alternative. What did you make of that from yesterday?
I'm worried this offense might look more like a Transformers movie and less like one of those actual sleek Avengers-style blockbusters that we've come and grown accustomed to. I get and totally understand why Kearis says what he says and why you'd want to hear that, but for me, with all the struggles we saw last season in 2019, with all the twists and turns we've seen with this offense in 2019, as you sort of have said, I'm not expecting a pretty picture to come out on Saturday, but maybe to keep the movie analogy going, maybe this is a movie that, isn't initially beloved in its time, but as it gets older and grows, it ages and becomes sort of a cult classic. And maybe that's what this Georgia offense ends up looking like. 'Cause that's what we thought the LSU offense was going to be a year ago. There was this talk of how great is it? Is LSU finally going to fix things and turn things around? And ultimately, we look back on it, and that's exactly what they did. But this time a year ago, going into LSU's first game, no one was saying that the LSU offense was going to be John Wick or reinvent cinema.
Yeah, no, I think it's probably fair to say. Let me also say one more thing about Kearis here too. I wasn't expecting a John Wick reference. The other thing I would say might be a part of Kearis's enthusiasm, and he obviously can't say this. Maybe this is subconscious and he doesn't even realize it. It could be that one of the reasons he's so excited about the Todd Monken offense is because the Monken offense is just better at using him. Maybe he's a year older. I would say that Monken is probably better equipped than maybe Coley was a year ago. So while maybe I temper my expectations at the beginning of the season for the offense across the board in terms of using a guy like Kearis better than maybe the Georgia offense was, and maybe it's even unfair to Coley because Kearis actually was pretty banged up, for a while last season too. But I do expect Monken, even at the beginning of the year where this thing is still a work in progress, I expect him to use guys like Kearis better. So maybe part of Kearis' enthusiasm is just on the basis that he thinks this offense is just better at using him.
Right, and another player who I think would fit that same Kearis mold would be a guy like James Cook, who I think we can all agree a year ago was not properly utilized in that James Coley offense. And from all indications in camp, Cook has had a fantastic, offseason. So we take that into consideration. If Georgia is getting a lot out of Zamir White, James Cook, even a guy like Kearis Jackson as well, a sort of running back who's playing wide receiver of sorts, maybe there is a little something there with this offense.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about. Let me move on to JT Daniels here for a moment. And, off the air, one of the best things and worst things about me is I'm sort of fascinated by small scale conspiracies. I don't ever I don't ever take anything anyone says at face value. I always assume there must be some sort of ulterior motive. So with the JT Daniels thing, this whole thing is really confusing to me. I honestly don't know what's going on. Maybe it's just 100% face value the way it's been described, but it seems like we've kind of gone from the notion that JT Daniels is expected to be cleared to now being hopeful that he's going to be cleared. Georgia's a 25-point favorite. This seems like a lot of subterfuge, for a game against Arkansas. You wonder if this might be about something bigger than that, or maybe he just is more hurt than he's been led on. People with their own eyes have seen him practice. That part of this complicates things for me a little bit. You were obviously a part of the virtual Smart press conference yesterday. Do you have a sense of what you think's going on here, or is this just a quarterback who's hurt and they're trying to get him back, which is precisely what Kirby Smart has said?
So this is, to indulge in your conspiracy theory, and this is just speculation, just speculating right here. I think a few weeks ago they went from, yes, 100% certainty Daniels is going to be ready for this opener to less than that. And with that, I believe that Georgia made the decision, well, let's just not risk it, especially with an Auburn game in week 2. Let's just go ahead and say Mathis internally, obviously, because they're never going to publicly come out and announce this.
And to be clear, this is what you're speculating.
This is speculating.
Yeah.
We're going to give D'Wan the reps with the ones. If JT gets cleared late, right before the start of the season, which it looks like it's going to end up being the case, if that does happen, they're prepared they're prepared for the worst in which Daniels isn't cleared to start this season.
So this may be more speculation than you're comfortable doing. I'm very happy to tell you I don't know the answer right now. What if the order of the games were reversed? What if Georgia was playing Auburn this week? Do you think there's a chance they're singing a different song about JT Daniels right now? And that's not a shot at D'Wan Mathis, but you'd want as many healthy players as you could get if you were playing Auburn, even if it's a combination of the two quarterbacks. Do you think the way in which Daniels is seemingly being treated would be different if they were playing a much, much better opponent in Auburn?
I believe it is less of a slam dunk that D'Wan Mathis is the starter in that theoretical scenario where they are playing Auburn first. I think they'd keep their options more open because I've long said it doesn't matter who you play at quarterback here. Georgia should be able to beat Arkansas, even if Stetson Bennett was the starting cornerback. With Auburn, that's not the case. You're going to need some sort of playmaking ability to come from that quarterback position. It could be D'Wan Mathis, it could be JT Daniels, but they have to put the guy they believe, regardless of injury, gives them the best chance of winning that game against Auburn. Because while I'm not quite as high on them as you are, I still think that is a very losable game for Georgia.
So I said this to John Stinchcomb yesterday. John's a very polite guy. I don't think he necessarily agreed with what I said. I'm going to give you a chance to see if you think this one way or another. I think ultimately the starting quarterback for Georgia for the preponderance of the season, to use a bigger word than I should use, is going to be the better passer. Either Mathis becomes the better passer or JT Daniels, who's been a starter before, cements his position as we assumed the better passer. Eventually, this job is won by the guy who's just more capable with the ball in his hands looking to throw. However, at the beginning of the season, if my suspicions are true, this is still kind of a work in progress offensively. The extra dimension that Mathis can provide with his legs that I don't believe that Daniels can provide, nor anybody else in the Georgia offense, Georgia may be very glad to have that in the early going. And eventually maybe Mathis is just a better thrower too, and therefore he's the starting quarterback. But at the beginning of the season, I think they'll be glad to have Mathis. And as you get towards those other games later on the year, the most efficient throw in sports, or I should say in the sport, is still a passed ball more so than a quarterback run. This job will eventually be determined either because Mathis proves himself to be a capable thrower or Daniels leans on the experience he already has to be better than Mathis in that regard. Kind of a long-winded setup, but what do you think?
I definitely agree with whoever the quarterback is in this offense is going to be the one that is the best passer, the best thrower of the football. We saw that a year ago. If Jake Fromm is able to throw the ball a little bit better a season ago, and there were a variety of reasons why that wasn't the case, James Coley's probably still the offensive coordinator here, to be frank. As far as the Mathis thing at the beginning of the season, I don't so much put it necessarily on, he adds playmaking, whereas JT Daniels doesn't right now. I pretty much 100%, if Daniels were healthy, I believe he would absolutely be the starting quarterback against Arkansas, because there's some uncertainty as to whether or not he's going to be cleared. That's why they've moved ahead with Mathis.
All right, let me move on and talk about Arkansas here for a moment, because I gave the number yesterday that if you look at the last 3 years, this 2017 through 19 seasons, Arkansas obviously is just 1-23 straight up in SEC play during that time. That's been pretty well documented. However, what I pointed out yesterday is over the course of that same span, when playing at home as a home underdog in SEC play, Arkansas is actually 6-3 against the spread. They have kept some of these games a little closer than they're supposed to over the course of the last 3 years. What I'm leading to on this is, what if this game is a 2-touchdown Georgia lead going into the fourth quarter? Is there anxiousness? Is there nervousness? Are Georgia fans kind of fine with that? I mean, through multiple coaches, the end of the Brett Bielema era, portions of the Chad Morris era, Arkansas has just sort of had a way of just kind of making games ugly, and you never thought they're going to have a chance to win, but they have a way of sort of making their opponent look bad sometimes. Are you at all concerned that final 15 minutes of play, Georgia's only up 2 touchdowns on Saturday, and maybe people are getting a little bit restless that they're not exactly, pounding this 25-point underdog into the ground? I
believe with what we've already said about the game and how we think the Georgia offense might come out and look, I can almost guarantee you there's going to be restlessness, upset people in the DawgNation postgame show on Saturday. People just are not going to be happy with what I think they're going to want to see on Saturday. You bring in a guy like Monken, you see what his offense did at Oklahoma State, even at Southern Miss as well. There's going to be people, why aren't we scoring like LSU did a season ago? Because that's the bar that has been set for Georgia. That's the sort of quote-unquote goal that is out there. This NFL guru comes in, reinvigorates the offense, and just blows out all the records. You saw it at Alabama with Tua and sort of the opening up of that offense. And if you don't see that away with what we know about people in general, they're just going to be impatient, and they're going to be wondering, well, what exactly are we doing here with Monken? If it's another 28-7, or to do the quick math in my head, a 35-7 or 31-3 game where Georgia does what it needs to, it flexes its muscles a little bit, but it never really sort of gets out of second gear in terms of putting up points, in terms of finding those explosive plays they're looking for.
I'm going to do more on this later in the week, but the one chance I think that Georgia really does have at a blowout on Saturday, I detected a little bit of enthusiasm in Smart's voice in speaking about Zamir White, James Cook yesterday. It was the end of the press conference. It was a question you actually asked, I believe. I detected a little bit of enthusiasm. I don't want to read too much into that. But I think Kirby's pretty excited about putting Zamir and Cook to work. Georgia rushed for nearly 300 yards in the season opener last year against Vanderbilt, if memory serves. Mm-hmm. And, big runs from both these guys might be the recipe for a blowout on Saturday, I would suggest as well.
I would agree, and I actually think back to how that Vanderbilt game played out a year ago. It was 30-6. They left some plays out there, but they did certainly enough to win that game and win so comfortably. I think you're going to see a repeat of that on the road at Arkansas on Saturday. All
right, let me finish with this, and I don't want to be negative at all because I'm really excited about the upcoming weekend of not just Georgia but the entirety of the SEC. But I will admit one thing for a moment. In my enthusiasm about getting back to football and celebrating when leagues and teams are finding a way to do that, one thing I probably haven't been paying close enough attention to is just how, I don't even know what the word I'm looking for is, particular some of this contact tracing stuff is. And, you've seen cancellations. There's some, concern about some of the games this upcoming weekend. I said yesterday on the show that I think that Georgia fans ought to take a moment to be happy about where we are now compared to where many of us, or maybe many of you, thought Georgia might be as recently as a few months ago. But the hay is not completely in the barn as of yet. You got a bunch of testing you got to do this week, and you got to see who actually shows up in Fayetteville on Saturday. I expect Georgia to get this right and do this well, but I'm a little anxious about this. Kirby, I know, talked about this. We're going to hear some of that audio before we're done on today's show, but can you just kind of bring us back up to date on what this week is going to look like for Georgia from a contact tracing standpoint, testing standpoint? Admittedly, I probably haven't been paying close enough attention to this.
Well, I have some good news for you to sort of alleviate some of your concerns on this. Since the show has started, since we have gotten this bird up in the air, the SEC actually came out and announced that. So in the NFL, one of the things that they've done to sort of mitigate coronavirus, and they've done so very effectively, I believe there have been no positive player tests to this point.
That's right.
They have these wristbands that sort of make it easier for contract tracing to see who's come in contact with people and sort of isolating them. And it's, I think, really done a great job of helping keep that NFL product on the field. The SEC announced today that they are going to be implementing that same technology with these athletes. So in theory, it makes contact tracing much, much easier, and it does a much better job of containing the spread, so to speak, of, one person gets it. If they're wearing that wristwatch, to my understanding, it'll let people know quicker than more so just waiting for test results to come in. And as of right now, they are testing 3 times a week. I believe it is Sunday, Tuesday, and Friday. So obviously that Friday is the biggest one before the games. And with what we've kind of seen from college football so far, it's not necessarily so much the rash of positive tests.
That's right.
That have set teams back. It is the contact tracing that comes with, and this is an NCAA rule where if you come into close contact with somebody, which you do at a college football practice, 14 days automatically you cannot play, or you cannot practice and be in those sort of situations. So this new implementation of technology by the SEC, I think, is going to help sort of alleviate some of the concerns with the contract tracing. And to our knowledge right now, Georgia obviously doesn't put out a ton of its COVID information, but we have every reason to believe that there are limited numbers, if any, on this team right now.
Yeah, so we'll continue to follow that. I think what you mentioned there with the technology available is good news. And listen, I don't want to go down the road of who thinks what about, how college football is handling the virus itself. We've certainly done, more of that than I'll ever care to again. But the one thing I think everybody can agree about is the frustration of having guys sidelined who didn't test positive and the huge numbers, seemingly, games essentially canceled because of large numbers of players not able to play who didn't test positive for the virus. I would say that's frustrating for anyone, no matter what side of the overall debate you fall on.
Right, especially when I know the Pac-12 has talked about saying, hey, they're going to do daily testing. I believe the Big Ten has possibly mentioned that as well, but I'm not 100% sure of that. And with the SEC, testing every 3 days right now, and that might even increase going forward as testing procedures become more readily available. It does, and David Hale raised this point, why is it a longer, wait time of close contact than it is for a positive actual test? Because with a positive test, it's just 10 days.
That's a good point.
Whereas with quarantining, because of close contact, it is 14. I do wonder if I doubt this will happen, because we know the NCAA moves like an oil tanker about sort of changing their policy on this. And if you repeatedly have negative tests after coming into close contact, maybe they ease up and maybe go from like a 14-day thing to potentially just a 5-day thing.
Plus, there is a cynical view out there that the entire NCAA policy is just a spiteful act of vengeance because they weren't more involved in the college football conversation that took place during the offseason.
And they want to try, they're not having other fall championships, and because they don't control it, they don't control the football one, they are trying to spike the football and ruin the party, so to speak.
Let me just do this real quick. I don't have a fancy graphic for this, but I know you've got a good piece up on the Georgia defense. That was interesting yesterday in the Kirby Smart press conference. I don't believe he was asked a single question about defense. We got a chance to hear from a couple of guys yesterday. That's obviously a magnified story with the unsettled situation at quarterback. Give us an idea of what we can read from you at DawgNation.com about that UGA defense.
Yeah, Kirby, as you point out, he was not asked a single question about that defense yesterday. And I asked Monty Rice, expectations, what are they? Jermaine Johnson sort of touching on the Arkansas offense as well. The Georgia, there's been a lot of talk about sacks, creating more havoc, turnovers, etc. The Georgia defense, I think, just wants to get out there and play. They have a lot of guys that are capable of being really good players, and the depth there is incredible. They're, in my opinion, on paper right now, they're the best defense in the country. And they're really, I think, excited to show that they can actually be that and somehow be even more improved than that 2019 team that they don't really seem to want to talk about all that much.
Given the fact they're wearing the red breeches, the white jerseys, kind of the throwback to 1980, I'm a little bit surprised the notion of calling this group the Junkyard Dogs again hasn't shown up, I guess is the verb I'm looking for there, hasn't shown up as a little bit more of a talking point. Maybe nobody cares anymore. Maybe it's just been too long. But I kind of thought we'd hear a little bit more Junkyard Dog talk, just given the fact that, Georgia is actually wearing the uniforms of the Junkyard Dogs on Saturday.
Yeah, it'll be interesting I wonder if we see a throwback where Georgia, to the 1980 season, where Georgia tries to win a game by completing just one pass. I'd certainly be all for that. But, it's been a long offseason. I know I have been probably a little bit more pessimistic of the fact of just getting to this point than you have been. And I'm just incredibly glad and grateful that we're right now, they're reviewing. We scored the touchdown. They are reviewing it just to make sure the ruling is confirmed and upheld. And all signs right now point to Georgia actually having a football game on Saturday, something in May, June, April. I didn't think we'd get the pleasure of having. So I'm very excited for that this weekend.
Apology accepted. I'm playing. Thanks for being here, Connor.
No problem. As always, it was a pleasure.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Connor says there at the end. Let's bring that news down just a little bit. I totally agree with what Connor says there at the end, that we just need football. We need things that bring us together. I'm not going to be a blowhard about this for very long, but football creates that, provides that. It really does give us a chance to connect with people we otherwise might not connect with, or in a time of social distancing and things like that, connect with people when we might not be connected to people at all other than that. I can say that with my own family. I have an 8-year-old son. My daughter's 5. She doesn't care about sports quite as much. In fact, she would probably tell you that she hates it. But my son loves sports, and you go back to like March, April, that time when there was very little sports on TV, if none at all. That opportunity to kind of gather around and talk about something, boy, that bond is frayed a little bit. All of a sudden you start getting, baseball back on the field, NFL returning. All of a sudden you got that easy connection to make with family and friends, people you care about. That's why college football matters. That's why I think it's essential. And, boy, I'm just proud of the SEC for the work that it's done to get back on the field this Saturday. Can't wait for that. By the way, we'll hear more from Kirby Smart on that coming up in just a moment. The other great thing about football being back here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, is it gives us something to bet on this upcoming weekend as well. So with that in mind, let's move into our MyBookie best bets for the upcoming weekend as a way of previewing what's going on in the SEC. I'll give you a few thoughts on a few of these games, and we'll do a lot more of this throughout the week, including Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews on the DawgNation video channels later on this week. So let me throw up the SEC point spreads here. I'll tell you the games I have a strong feeling on, the games I don't. UGA at Arkansas, as I've said before, I'm not expecting that to necessarily be a thing of beauty. Kentucky at Auburn. I know that there's a lot of folks who are going to be in love with Kentucky here. Stoops is kind of considered a darling, of the media coach these days, and he's certainly done a pretty good job there. He's made Kentucky a pretty physical program. I think this is a chance for Auburn to kind of show what it's about a little bit, and admittedly, I do think they are better than they've been given credit for. I don't take pleasure in saying that because I don't like Auburn, but I do take some pleasure in that. I don't have a strong feeling about. I should say I don't take pleasure in saying that Auburn is good, but I do expect them to put up a big showing. I expect them to cover the 10 points against Kentucky. Let me just be clear about what I'm trying to say there. You move on to Florida at Ole Miss. I don't have a strong feeling about this game one way or another. I would say the one thing, though, that has not been talked about in this game enough, in Oxford on Saturday, Dan Mullen's return to the Magnolia State is going to be a very big deal. I think it's still ongoing. Certainly within the last year or so, there's been reporting on this. There was a business in Oxford that sued Mullen and sued former Mississippi State Athletic Director Scott Strickland for defamation related to the whole Leo Lewis, Laramie Tunsil thing, stuff like that. Dan Mullen is not a well-liked figure in Starkville whatsoever. Does that have an impact on the point spread on Saturday? I don't think it does, because I don't quite think Ole Miss is going to be good enough. As I said before, they are one of the few teams in the SEC right now that's probably still a little unsettled at quarterback. John Rice Plumlee was the guy a year ago. You almost get the sense that Lane Kiffin might end up favoring Matt Corral a bit more. But a interesting subplot to that one, the fact that Mullen back in the state playing against a school that does not like him very much. The absence of fans, the absence of tailgating may soften that just a little bit, but that's still something to think about. Mississippi State's at LSU. I think this is a game for LSU to show that even with all the attrition, they are still better than people are giving them credit for. Brennan at quarterback, not sure what to expect from him. I still like the wide receivers, even minus Jamar Chase. I think the running game, minus Clyde Edwards-Helaire, is going to be actually better than some people realize. I think a Rick Gilbert, I hate the thought of what he might do in an LSU uniform this season. So at home, first game for the defending national champions, I see a pretty easy cover there. Alabama at Missouri. This is one of those games where if you look at Missouri, they've got some players out. You almost wonder if they're circling the wagons looking ahead to a future week. Alabama may have an easy time on the road at Missouri. Vandy at Texas A&M. I meant to mention yesterday the linebacker that's opted out. That's now a couple of pretty high-profile absences for the Aggies. All of a sudden you wonder, someone like me who thinks of Texas A&M is pretty good and has thought, as one of our commenters, Kevin Drummer, said on Facebook yesterday, one of the tougher games for Florida. Is that still a really tough game, given the fact there's some high-profile departures off this Aggies roster? I think that's probably a pretty fair question to ask. We may not find much of that out against Vanderbilt on Saturday, but it's worth looking ahead for the weeks to come. And then finally this. I just think this is the game of the week in the SEC. Tennessee going to South Carolina. Gamecocks a 3-point home underdog. A lot of home underdogs in the SEC this week. By my count, there are 4 home underdogs in the SEC. That's a lot for a Saturday. It's a little bit different because you have only SEC games on this particular weekend. Gamecocks are one, though, that I expect to win outright. I just think that Tennessee starts the season a little overrated compared to the momentum it had at the end of last year. I think sometimes we turn bowl wins into false positives. That may be going on with the Vols. I think sometimes we have a tendency to exaggerate on the basis of close wins. Tennessee had some of those late in the season there as well. I think a lot of that kind of works to create Tennessee into maybe more than it actually is. And I have been very clear about this. For as much as some people have Will Muschamp on the hot seat, I think Mike Bobo as a coordinator is good enough to save his job. They're going to play slower. They're going to be careful. The loss of Marshawn Lloyd decimates what I believe was going to be a big part of their running game, but better than the experts think after a 4-8 season a year ago. I think that Carolina probably plays well enough to keep Muschamp employed. I think the defensive line's better than you realize there. Secondary's pretty good. Muschamp's just a good defensive coach. Now, Pruitt's defense at Tennessee's no slouch either. I look for a low-scoring game on both sides, and South Carolina finding a way to get it done at home. That's my biggest play of the weekend as a MyBookie best bet. By the way, speaking of our friends at MyBookie, great time to check them out. Winning season at MyBookie. You can simply find them online, put MyBookie into your browser, and the internet will do the work for you. Then when you get there, you have a chance to make a big first deposit bonus. They can double your first deposit. You get up to $1,000, but you've got to use the promo code DawgNation. It's one word spelled DAWG. After that, you play, you win, you get paid. There's all kinds of ways to get involved. College football, professional football, NFL, everything else. It's all going on there for you at MyBookie. It's winning season, but to get the big first deposit bonus, to get up to $1,000, to get it doubled, you've got to use the promo code DawgNation, spelled DAWG, all one word. Find MyBookie online, and good luck to you after that, because you may play, win, and get paid with our friends at MyBookie. All right, here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Let me turn the attention now back fully to Georgia on Saturday as we're on the road to kickoff with our friends at Kroger here. And one of the big things for Georgia to get ready to do on Saturday is, as Connor was kind of detailing here, testing folks 3 times this week, handling the tracing part of that. Apparently the watch technology, the wrist technology they're going to be utilizing, similar to the NFL, is going to make that a little bit easier. But Kirby kind of went into some more details on that when he spoke to reporters yesterday, that the actual travel to Fayetteville may not be that different than what you're used to, but obviously it's just a matter of, who you're testing and, how all that's going to go. Kirby, pretty forthright on that. Here's what Kirby said yesterday.
I don't know that the actual traveling is going to change a whole lot. I think a lot of people are anticipating major change. The biggest change is that everyone going on the trip will have been tested multiple times, 3 times in a game week, including possibly one the day of travel. So that's the most unique thing. They're trying to weed out anyone being in the travel party that would have COVID. Can you 100% do that? No. but we can come as accurate as possible. And that would be the goal. But as far as actual travel, I mean, it's not like we're going to be completely in a bubble. We're going to be on planes and buses and transporting the same way we typically do. We just are testing everybody in that party.
So to remind you of here for a moment, it is an SEC road game. That means Georgia's only allowed to travel 70 players. Here's also one of the things where the Georgia overall roster strength should help a bit, because if you do have a couple of guys that you can't take for whatever reason, seemingly Georgia's got the roster balance to be able to mitigate against that. There are obviously some high-profile players that if you were to lose them would certainly be noticeable and would hurt your performance. But for the most part, Georgia cross-trains a lot of guys at, various positions. Georgia plays a lot of guys as it is. Obviously, I'm hopeful that the 70 guys we see on the sideline on Saturday are exactly the ones that we kind of assumed that we would see. But, but ultimately, Georgia's got the kind of roster that in dealing with some of this kind of stuff, they may be better equipped than some others are. There's already some rumors out there about, what's going on at Kansas State. They're supposed to be playing Oklahoma on Saturday. Wildcats have dealt with a lot of this already, and they're concerned that they're dealing with more of it going into this game. This is going to be just an ongoing story, and it's one of those things you sort of brace, for whatever you're going to hear at any given moment, but this is just part of it. The one thing we all said going back months ago was, if we could just get a season on the field, we would take whatever came after that. We would tolerate some of you who love traveling not getting to go to games this year. Others of you who, used to get 4 tickets, now you get 2, or whatever else. Georgia Tech canceled. We just make the best of the situation. If we can actually get the games on the field, well, that's exactly what's happening. Games will be on the field, and in some form or fashion, we're all just going to make the best of the situation. Let me mention this briefly before we're done here. I thought this was kind of interesting. First of all, I think a lot of us were pretty impressed with the lavish introduction for Deion Sanders as new coach of Jackson State. And I don't know if this was the first offer that Sanders put out, but it was certainly among the first offers. It may have been the very first to Deshaun Nugget Warren, Georgia commit. Nugget put this on Twitter yesterday that he's been offered by Jackson State. So, Deion Sanders, who's been heavily involved in the high school football scene for quite some time now, and really has kind of worked his way up to be now a head coach at a place like Jackson State. Obviously, we expect him to be a good recruiter, certainly trying to, establish the bona fides of a place like Jackson State, and an offer to Deshaun Nugget Warren, I guess, the first example of that. So we'll see how Deion does there at Jackson State. By the way, Gator Hater Updater on the way out the door here. Let me give you that number as we get ready to say goodbye to you. 1,424 days. We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And on video, a lot of ground covered today, and we appreciate all of you for being a part of it with us here today. I'll also remind you, as I said before, Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews, returns later on this week. I'm really excited about that. More thoughts on some of these SEC games. We'll kind of dive into that. Dari Payro from R.S. Andrews going to be with us. Dari's not with us right now because he's busy thinking about your air conditioning or your heating system or your plumbing or electrical system. The entire team there at R.S. Andrews really dedicated themselves to learning as much as they can about those systems kind of behind the walls in your house. We don't really know how those work, but the folks at R.S. Andrews have dedicated themselves to learning as much about that as they possibly can. So if you're in need of some of that kind of stuff, they'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. It's what makes R.S. Andrews special and different. You can find them online at rsandrews.com. All right, let's try to do 10 minutes, get off the air here a little after 11:05 or so. And I'm going to go to Facebook first because I was on YouTube to start the show yesterday. So let me pull this up. Like I said, we'll do 10 minutes. We'll try to get off the air around 11:05 or so. And we will just try to have as much fun as we possibly can. And you can share your thoughts on anything related to what we're talking about as I search for the broadcast to show up here. Oh, me. What is all right, let's see. Here we go. There we go. All right, on Facebook. Here we go. Gary and Christian Gulisano says, I'm not sure Georgia's going to cover the spread, light it up versus Arkansas. Yeah, I would say that's probably true as well. He says, especially when Auburn, Bama, and Tennessee lurking, look for a vanilla offense. Yeah, I think that's probably true. Now, you say vanilla offense. I don't know what Georgia holds back in this game. I think sometimes we have a tendency to sometimes hope that's more true than it ends up actually being. But I do think, though, that for a lot of teams, not just Georgia, but other teams, I think you may see a situation when a heavy favorite is winning. They may just be satisfied with the win and look to move on there, not necessarily revving the gas near the end of the game if at all possible. I said yesterday, for me, the Georgia season can be split in half. I think you've got a survive season, and I think you've got a thrive season. In Arkansas comes what I view as the survive portion of the season. That means you've got to stay healthy and ready for the Auburns and the Tennessees, the Alabamas that are to come after that. Then beyond that, it's off week, then it's Florida, then it's a much, much easier level of competition, at least on paper. That's your thrive season. That's when we need to see Georgia at its best. At that point in time, leaning on its depth, dominating opponents that might be overmatched, and getting a chance to catch its breath, all things hopefully, no cancellations, things like that. Getting a chance to catch its breath before it plays Florida. That's your thrive season. You're in what I kind of view as the survive portion of the season for Georgia right now. What Georgia does in the survive season, finding a way to come out of that with as pretty a record as they can have, will be what determines just how much of a national championship contender Georgia actually is once it gets to what I view as the thrive portion of the season. The other thing I think you may have is, and this is where things are going to get complicated and tricky. Do you remember when Lane Kiffin as Tennessee coach played Florida for the first time? And there had been some, talk, Kiffin had said some things about Urban Meyer, and there was some thought that Urban Meyer was going to try to run up the score on Tennessee and stuff like that. And, Florida won easily. The score itself ended up not being all that brazen. It sort of seemed like Tennessee just sort of had a game plan to keep the game close. For some of these overmatched teams this year, we may see some examples of that hey, there's a lot of clock control, a lot of careful football, a lot of let's not go crazy trying to do too much in a game we probably can't win anyway. We may see some of that. Now, the flip side is you may also see the opposite as well. I mentioned before, Missouri's got some guys absent for Alabama. If you view that as an unwinnable game, then why not just hold out everybody who's at the slightest risk of anything as a way of circling the wagons for a game you might actually have a better shot at winning later on in the year, or at least playing more competitive. So figuring out what to do with some of these very heavy favorites against what would appear to be overmatched SEC competition this year, try to figure out which side of that certain teams might be on, that's probably a little bit of a tricky evaluation. Jimmy Guthrie says Pickens over under 100 yards. I say over. I would say that's good news for Georgia, because I think one of the things that you're going to judge Georgia on this year is, can it still get the ball to George Pickens when opposing defenses know that's exactly what Georgia wants to do? This means quarterback, whether it be Mathis or Daniels or somebody else, will have to throw it into a tight window. This means that Todd Monken's going to have to be creative in terms of how you scheme things up to get Pickens open, even when defenses are trying to take him away. Remember what Pickens told us on yesterday's show, that he's developed some tricks and tools that Monken's taught him. This means that Pickens is also going to have to do more than just be a better athlete than his competition. He's going to have to be crisp with his routes. He's going to have to, he's going to have to be a technician at the position as well. So 100 yards for Pickens would be a pretty good benchmark of, hey, this Georgia offense is at least working well enough to not allow opposing defenses to take that playmaker away. Kevin Drummer says, how about 250 through the air for Mathis, 50 on the ground, 2 passing, 2 rushing touchdowns? Let me tell you something. That'll be a fun show on Monday. If that's what's going to happen, that's a fun show. Somebody asked about Deion Sanders as a recruiter. Yeah, I mean, I would say that Deion's going to probably, I didn't see the name. I apologize for not reading your name. But I would say that Deion's probably going to be a pretty good recruiter at a place like Jackson State. I can see that. And he may be looking to, make a name for himself there. I'd expect him to be able to do some things there. And Deion recruiting other defensive backs, obviously, there's going to be, a lot of cachet there because Deion may be the best defensive back of all time. Let's get a few more. Hugh Nash says, who's your surprise breakout player early in the season, the offense and the defense? So, I don't know if this counts as a surprise, but when he's healthy, I do expect Trey McKinney to have a really good year for Georgia. Does that still count as a surprise? I expect Georgia to use him when he's in there. I've talked a lot about James Cook. I do think that James Cook's going to have a really big season right now. I hope I'm not setting myself up for more than this Georgia offense is able to provide for Cook, but I have a lot of expectations for that. Defensively, what would even count as a surprise defensively? Does this count? The other day, Jordan Davis kind of downplayed the idea of what he might do statistically. I'm actually of the mind that Davis is going to have a much better statistical year than some people think he's going to have. But at this point in time, he's been pretty, heavily talked about, highly regarded. I'm trying to think what would even count on that. Because at this point in time, everybody's got, huge high expectations for all the secondary guys. And I think a lot of those may end up being somewhat interchangeable. I'm like everybody else, Jalen Carter as a freshman defensive lineman. I do expect him to be about as good as advertised. I heard some good things from him coming from the scrimmage a couple of weeks ago, confirming seemingly the buzz that had already existed for him. That's not a very, unique name because other people have said the same thing, but I guess that's a name I might mention in that spot. Let me go over to YouTube for a moment. We'll get a few comments there. Boy, a lot of video content coming in the next few days here around DawgNation as well. Mentioned Go With The Flow with R.S. Andrews. We've got a lot of good stuff coming up in the very near future on all of that. So when I pull up YouTube, I just Google search it to pull it up. I don't, and sometimes how like Google will have like suggested videos for you there. A lot of the ones it'll show are like the old videos of me back when I had a beard. It's almost hard for me to believe that was ever even real life. But it was a couple months worth of beard, right? Almost hard to believe that was ever actually something that happened. All right, let's see what else is going on. I don't believe I said Ole Miss was in Starkville. It's in Oxford. I believe I said Oxford. I believe Oxford. Green Soldier says, how much weight does the Ohio State offer for Mathis have now? Does that show a baseline of talent that can be elite, or is it old news? No, I mean, I think that, you do judge guys by the offers that they had. And, Urban Meyer's had good quarterbacks. So, yeah, I would say that the Ohio State offer is part of the cachet for Mathis. The fact that Georgia moved as quickly to get him as it did once it realized it could, that's also part of that too. Georgia wouldn't have gone after him either if they didn't think he had a chance to be a top-flight player. Dapper Dan says Sanders just getting a little experience before he takes the FSU job in a few years. The way the Florida State's going right now, you almost wonder if Deion's going to want it when it becomes available. Frank Patterson says, give us your rushing yards prediction for this week. I would say that Georgia could have a chance to get up 250-ish or so on the ground. About 250 or so there. 3 maybe asking a little too much. CB says I said Starkville twice. There's no way I said Starkville twice. Maybe I did, but I don't think so. I believe I said Oxford. But maybe I did. Vodka says, thoughts on Arian Smith and Jermaine Burton. Probably waiting a little while on Arian Smith, I would say. But Jermaine Burton at this point in time, I would think is going to be treated as one of Georgia's top 3 receivers. I would assume that Burton is on the field a ton. I think they're going to use him both as an outside and inside weapon. I think they're going to be very creative in how they go about that. And I would say that for right now, I've talked a lot about Marcus Rosemy-Jackson and, Justin Robinson, guys like that. And all of them are, worth praising for various reasons. But for the moment, it certainly appears that Burton may have put a little distance between himself and the other freshman wide receivers. I think that in the case of Rosemy-Jackson, I think he's going to play a good bit on Saturday too, if I had to guess. But I would say that Burton is one of the 2 or 3 most important receivers on this team at the moment. That's kind of where I think Jermaine probably is right now. Jacob Thompson says, up 3 touchdowns with time on the clock. Only prescription will be more Zeus. Boy, I'd love to see that. You almost wonder how many Georgia fans are going to be there on Saturday. I am proud to say that not just me, but my entire family, we're all going to the Georgia-Arkansas game. on Saturday. But I'll tell you more about that on the show this week. But you almost wonder, like, there's only going to be 20,000 fans in the whole stadium. It's like 1 or 2 Georgia fans when White gets a chance to carry it. Who's? It's like it's going to be an empty enough stadium where 1 or 2 people doing it you might be able to hear. I mean, do you guys have any idea, like, how many Georgia fans do you expect to see on Saturday? P. Rich says, I think that Justin Robinson's still going to be major as the season goes on. Yeah, I would say that Robinson is likely to be on the trip on Saturday. I would say, that's the first step for a freshman. Be on that roster on your way to Arkansas. I would say that Robinson's likely to be on that trip on Saturday, and then we will see, what happens beyond that. Drew Odom says, who do you think Kirby will trust at punt return since Blaylock is hurt? Yeah, I'd say there are a couple of options there. I would say that, someone like Tyreek Stevenson may get a little bit of a look there. It wouldn't surprise me if, Burton got a little bit of a look there as well. I think if Stevenson's in play there. Yeah, so a couple of those guys like that. But you're right. I mean, Blaylock's loss is obviously, a factor in that discussion. Let's do a couple more. Get ready to go. League Go Down says, as long as we're running well, I don't want to go 3 and out, just trying to run the clock. We could have time to let other quarterbacks run the offense. Yeah, that's maybe true. It'll be interesting to see what happens, late in the game. One way or another, avoiding 3s and out, as you mentioned, is going to be important for Georgia. 23% of Georgia drives last season finished 3 and out. So that's something that Georgia had too much of a year ago. Going to try to find a way to avoid this year. SEC Dog says, what's your thoughts on Monken referring to our offense as, quote, going to be explosive? I hope it's true. Kearis Jackson said something similar. I think it has a chance to be true, but as I said before, you kind of divide the year into 2 halves. You have the survive season, you have the thrive season. I think the most explosive version of Georgia probably happens, Florida and beyond. In the early going, it's just about, dealing with 2 very tough opponents very close together, Auburn and Alabama. Tennessee's a good defense. I don't think Tennessee's a threat to beat Georgia, but it is a good defense. It's not an easy game. Kentucky on the road the week after Alabama, also kind of a physical team with its offensive line, with its defense. You may be looking to figure some stuff out then so that you're able to, show more of that later on. The time you really need the explosive offense, this is not me excusing it away if we don't see it early in the year, but if you want to win the SEC championship game, if you want to, move through the college football playoff, that's when you need to have your explosive offense. To beat most of the teams in your SEC schedule, even in an all SEC year, to beat most of those teams, you simply have to have the better players and the better, the better depth, and to be able to sort of handle the physical rigor of an SEC schedule. That's what you've got to be able to do. It's really the best teams in the country where you got to have that explosive offense show up. It's one of the reasons why Georgia's essentially been, 5th best in the country, 2nd best in the SEC of the last couple of years, just missing the full complement of that explosive, component. Even the final year of Jim Chaney, Georgia, statistically speaking, was good offensively, but I think I would stop short of saying, this was a great, dazzling offense to watch. You want to beat Alabama in the SEC championship, you want to beat teams in the college football playoff, you got to be able to score the big points. The playoff game that Georgia did win, they scored a lot of points to do so. So, that's what you got to be able to do, in the early portion of the season. It's just about making sure they can go out there and just handle the toughness that's on the way here. Green Soldier said he liked the fact that Monken was very specific about what he kind of looks for from his explosive stuff. And you're right about that. The one thing, though, that he also said, though, is in a year like this where it's 2 fewer games and, you're playing only SEC competition, that you might judge all of that this year in comparison to how you stand in the rest of the SEC, that the percentages, the numbers of those plays, total ones you expect, might be a little different just because of the weird nature of the schedule. But if Georgia's ranking near the top of the SEC in that regard this season, then they're probably in pretty good shape. Let me go back over to Facebook just for a minute, and we'll get ready to go. Chandler Johnson says if Daniels is not cleared as of today, what will change between now and Saturday? I just don't know. I mean, Kirby's obviously keeping this very close to the vest. There's a chance that there's a chance that he's more ready now than Kirby's letting on. There's a chance that he wasn't quite as healthy in the past as Kirby was letting on then. There's just, it's Kirby's prerogative to keep this very, very tightly closed, and that's exactly what he's doing. Let me do a couple more here. Nick Moore says UJ wasn't super explosive to start 2017, but became explosive throughout the season, so they give him a chance to get there like in 2017. I think that's right for Nick. You look at Javon Wims, who had a good year for Georgia in 2017. A lot of that did come later in the year. In the early portion of the season, when Jake Fromm was still getting comfortable as the starting quarterback, you didn't see the big numbers for Wims then that you saw by the end of the year. And, there were also the explosive runs in 2017. One of the things that was missing from Georgia last year, not just the absence of the explosive passing plays, but also just the smaller number of explosive runs. In 2017, Georgia was great at busting the long run. The Rose Bowl is a great example of that. So, yeah, this could be something that grows over the course of a season, much the same way it did in 2017. I think that's a fair point. Lucy Bowers-Boykin checking out. Thank you. Sandy Puckett, thanks for the kind words. I really appreciate that. I got to check out here, too. Let me do one more on YouTube, and we're going to go. Melissa May says there's some good people on this channel. Melissa May, you are one of those good people. I'm glad to have you here. Oh, Lord. Me, y'all are crazy. Stephen Wainwright asked a good question. How can the Big Ten play only 8 games and have a chance at the playoff? Of course, the Big Ten champion has a chance at 9 games because of the conference title game, but it's still less. In the case of Ohio State, they got that stretch where I think they play like Illinois, Maryland, Rutgers like 3 weeks in a row. It's kind of a joke. It definitely is. And, frankly, I'm going to complain about it. When these arguments start, I'm going to point out the truth. And as I've warned on a previous show, it's going to be maddening to hear people say some of the stuff they're going to say. So I can't make it better for you. I'm just going to warn you, go ahead and get ready to roll up your sleeves and, get your fighting shoes on, because there may be some fighting to come on this. It's just a fact. All right. All right. Good stuff. Appreciate all of you being here. Thank you so much. It's DawgNation Daily presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Let me remind you to check out the AJC online at ajc.com. Also, looking forward to Thursday, our community conversation, a look at how coronavirus has impacted sports in the city of Atlanta, the state of Georgia. Very, very impressive list of guests going to be on that panel. Atlanta Dream coach Nikki Collin, Georgia Athletic Director Greg McGarity, Georgia Tech Athletic Director Todd Stansberry, among others. Steve Koonin, the CEO of the Atlanta Hawks. I'm really thrilled to be the moderator for that. It's going to be a lot of, I would say, very informative night, but also a ton of fun to be a part of. That's the AJC video channels coming up on Thursday evening. We'll tell you more about that then. And also make sure you check out, speaking of the AJC, Atlanta News Now at ajc.com. Braves getting very close. I believe the magic number may be whittled down to essentially nothing. They get a chance to clinch the division possibly today. Of course, you've got the big news as of yesterday. Cole Hamels, I don't even know what to say about all this after a while. Somehow he's got a fatigued shoulder after throwing like 3 innings, but nonetheless, Hamels is out the door. You can read more about that at ajc.com. Also, fall activities, corn mazes, things like that. My kids love this kind of stuff. That is back. Looking forward to that. And politics in Georgia, the election coming up. You can read all about that at ajc.com as well. Get your Atlanta news now at ajc.com. Thanks for being here for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Get your air conditioning tuned up or your water heater replaced or anything like that. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. Trust R.S. Andrews for all of that online at rsandrews.com. Have a great day. I'll see you back here tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We'll look forward to speaking to you then, everybody. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.